Hi everyone, welcome to the last set of video lectures for the ecology unit. In this video, we are going to be doing a short introduction to nutrient cycles, and then in the second video, we'll be focusing specifically on the carbon cycle. So previously in our ecology unit, we've talked already about how energy can flow through an ecosystem and what it looks like when energy is transferred from one trophic level to the next. But here we're going to be focusing specifically on matter instead of energy. And we're going to be looking particularly at nutrients. So what are nutrients? So, a nutrient is a substance that's required by organisms for normal growth, maintenance, or reproduction. So, this is one of those words that it's used in everyday English as well as in biology, and I think these definitions are probably they probably line up pretty closely. So, hopefully, that definition of nutrient feels somewhat intuitive. And the big thing that I want to focus on is this second bullet point. So, we've already talked about energy um, moving through an ecosystem. And in contrast, nutrients are matter. So they're going to be atoms, different kinds of specific elements, and we're not going to ever lose nutrients or matter in general in an ecosystem. So all the nutrients within an ecosystem are going to stay in that ecosystem, but they're just going to be cycling between the biotic and the abiotic portions of the ecosystem itself. So if in the biotic section, it's going to be within living organisms. And then in the abiotic section, it could be that the nutrients are in the soil, or maybe the nutrients are in the atmosphere, maybe in rocks. So they can be in different sections of an ecosystem. Each kind of atom or each particular kind of nutrient is going to have its own unique cycle for where it's going to exist within that ecosystem. And so a nitrogen is going to have a different kind of cycle than phosphorus. And I'm talking about these cycles, and we'll get into more detail about that in a minute. And this is just a picture of the kinds of elements that are really important for living organisms. The ones that are circled in blue are the most important for the bulk of making up living things. And then we also have what are called trace elements that we don't need as much of, but they're still important they're still important. Okay, so here we're going to go over a sort of generic nutrient cycle. Since it is a cycle, there's not a real starting place, but we have to start somewhere. So we're going to start in the soil. So nutrients are going to exist in small inorganic molecules within the soil, and then those nutrients in the soil are going to be taken up by plants using their roots. So the plants are going to use those nutrients to build up their tissues. And then these plants are going to be eaten by primary consumers. And as that happens, in this process of consumption, the nutrients will be transferred from the plant to the consumer, to the herbivore. And then there are going to be higher trophic levels above that. So the herbivore might be eaten by a secondary consumer. Again, the nutrients will be transferred, and so on and so forth. So the nutrients will pass up the food chain via this process of consumption. And then the next step in the nutrient cycle is it all has to do with death. So the body of both the plants and all of the organisms within the food chain are going to, once those organisms die, their bodies will be broken down by decomposers. So these decomposers are going to take these dead bodies of the organisms in the ecosystem and sort of return those nutrients to the soil. So then the process can begin again where the nutrients are going to be taken up by new plants. So we get this sort of circle of life situation, and the decomposers are going to be really, really important because the molecules that we care about, these nutrients, are still in sort of the dead pieces of animals and plants once they die, but they're too big to be taken up by the roots of the plant. So we need the decomposers to break them back down into those small, tiny inorganic molecules that can be taken up by the roots. So decomposers are going to be really, really important for this process of nutrient cycling. Okay, and then this is the last slide for the introduction. It's just showing two examples of particular nutrient cycles as opposed to just the generic one in the other slide. So we were looking at the nitrogen cycle and the phosphorus cycle. You definitely don't need to memorize these or anything, but it's just to show sort of the different places that nitrogen and phosphorus can exist within an ecosystem. So in both cases, we have the nutrient existing in both biotic, so in animals and plants. So animals and plants, they can be in that sort of component of an ecosystem, but also in the inorganic sections of an ecosystem. So for nitrogen, we can see it can exist in the atmosphere. It's also existing down in the soil. And then for phosphorus, we're seeing it in sort of water, in rocks, and in soil as well. And then in both cases, we see that the decomposers are going to be playing a central role for sort of recycling the nutrients into a usable form again. So making them into these small inorganic molecules for nitrogen, and decomposers here to turn phosphorus into phosphates, where they can then be sort of going into different places in this nutrient cycle. Okay, so this was just a short introduction to nutrient cycles in general, and we'll be focusing specifically on the carbon cycle in our next video. So I will see you then.